Today, we're learning about the best block in Minecraft, the crafter. By the end of this video, you'll not only know what the crafter can do for you, but how to set it up to do so, even if you aren't already a redstone genius. Welcome back to Redstone from Zero, a series where I teach you redstone from its foundations, assuming you come in knowing absolutely nothing about it. I'm MistRazor, and as always, I recommend starting at lesson 0 and viewing the lessons in order, but I'll do my best to be comprehensible, even if you haven't. With that out of the way, let's talk about the crafter. The crafter works just like a crafting table, except that its inventory can be loaded using hoppers or droppers. And it only crafts when activated by a redstone signal. So anything you can make with the crafting table can be made with a crafter. A crafter's crafting grid inventory also works differently from other inventories in the game. In a chest with a hopper flowing into it, if you put a stack of coal into the hopper, the coal will all pile up in the first chest slot where coal can fit, either in an empty slot or in a partially filled slot that already has some coal, with the rest spilling over into the next available slot. But the crafter is different. If you have a hopper pointing into a crafter and drop a stack of coal into it, the first piece of coal will still go into the first empty slot in the crafter, but the second piece of coal will go into the next empty slot, and so will the third, and so on. Once there are no more empty slots, the coal will revisit each slot already containing coal, in order, depositing a single piece of coal before moving on to the next slot. But there's an easier way to remember how this works. While other inventories like chests, barrels, dispensers, and hoppers strive for compactness, using as few inventory slots as possible, a crafter strives for evenness, distributing any inputs across all available slots. The other thing that's different about crafter inventories is how the comparator interacts with them. Instead of needing to use a lookup table from the Minecraft wiki, it's very straightforward. How many of the crafter's 9 slots contain something? That number is your comparator output. So 5 slots are occupied, comparator output is 5. Meaning the minimum value is 0 when the crafter is completely empty, and the maximum value is 9 when all 9 slots are occupied. It's as easy as that. The last thing that makes the crafter's inventory different from other inventories is that you can click a slot to disable it. When a slot is disabled, items can't be added to it, but the comparator still treats it as if it contains something. So a crafter with 9 disabled slots will have a comparator output of 9. Clicking a disabled slot re-enables it, by the way. Disabling crafter slots let you set the shape of your recipe. Technically, you don't need to disable slots, since you could always put in a placeholder item in slots you don't want to use, then pull the placeholders out with an item filter under the crafter, but it certainly makes things easier. Rather than bothering with placeholder items, unless you have a really good reason, I'd recommend just disabling slots. Similar to previous redstone components we've encountered, the crafter activates on the rising edge of a redstone pulse. That is, when its redstone input power goes from off to on. On the rising edge of a redstone pulse, the crafter attempts to craft whatever is in its crafting grid. If its crafting grid contains a valid recipe, crafting succeeds and the crafted item is ejected from the front of the crafter. But if the crafting grid doesn't contain a valid recipe, crafting fails and nothing changes. There are 4 main ways to use the crafter for auto-crafting. 1. Single ingredient pulse spam. 2. Single ingredient crafter measurement. 3. Multi-ingredient input measurement. And 4. Ingredient batching. Let's go into detail for each one. Single ingredient pulse spam. Constantly try to fill the crafter with a single ingredient and spam redstone pulses. To make one of these, you just need a hopper pointing into your crafter and a redstone clock of any kind to endlessly apply redstone pulses to it. This is mainly useful for making things like coal blocks from coal, where there's only one recipe that can be made with a single ingredient, so attempting to craft early will always fail. If you tried to take the same approach to make chests from wooden planks, you'd end up with a lot of buttons, pressure plates, and slabs. See how the crafter doesn't have a chance to fill up enough to craft a chest before the next redstone pulse arrives and crafts a button? Single ingredient crafter measurement. This approach overcomes the limitations of the pulse spam approach by still constantly trying to fill the crafter with a single ingredient, but only sending a redstone pulse when all slots are filled. The simple way to make one of these is to still use a hopper pointing into your crafter, but now instead of a redstone clock, you use one comparator to read from the crafter, a second comparator to block the first comparator from outputting until it's at a signal strength of 9, and a redstone line leading from the comparator output back to the crafter to give it a redstone pulse every time it becomes full. This approach works, but there's a subtle problem with it. Consider what happens if, for whatever reason, the crafter contains enough items to successfully craft twice. That means even after crafting once, the comparator output is going to be stuck at 9. And remember that crafters only craft on the rising edge of a redstone pulse. In other words, the comparator output will never turn off, which means there will be no new rising edges. This leads to the crafter not crafting anymore and just filling up with ingredients. Luckily, we already have a tool for dealing with this problem, from the item counter in Lesson 7. If we add a redstone repeater to the comparator output, that will raise the output power level to 15, which will lead to the comparator cutting off its own output signal, making it pulse repeatedly, and initiate crafting, until the crafter has fewer than 9 items remaining. Since there's nothing the spamming approach can make that this approach can't also make, the only reasons to use the spamming approach are because it's a little more compact and because it's slightly faster. The real advantage to this approach is that it never crafts before your desired recipe is ready, which is important when you're trying to craft ingots into blocks, because a pulse spamming approach will lead to crafting the ingots straight back into nuggets, or possibly into pressure plates. This approach should be your bread and butter for copper, iron, and gold farms, because it easily compresses nuggets into ingots and ingots into blocks. Just don't forget to filter out the rotten flesh or poppies first. Multi-ingredient input measurement. This approach allows for recipes that use multiple ingredients by using a hopper to constantly keep the crafter topped off, and pulsing with redstone only when the input hopper is full enough. To make this, you'll need a hopper pointing into your crafter and another pair of comparators like before, but this time the first comparator is in subtract mode, and reads from the input hopper, while the second comparator supplies a subtraction value of 14 to the first comparator, ensuring the first comparator outputs nothing until it can read an input value of 15, at which point it outputs a signal of 15 minus 4, that is to say it outputs a redstone power level of 1. We use that power level of 1 to strongly power a smooth stone block, which powers its adjacent redstone dust, which weakly powers the other smooth stone block. Then we add a redstone repeater to pull power from the weakly powered block, to bring that signal strength of 1 back up to 15, and loop a redstone line back into the comparator's other side input to create an item counter just like in the previous approach. This way we get a single pulse each time the hopper is completely full, and don't run into any problems if the hopper fills back up too quickly. However, there's a problem with this approach, which is that if you have a sufficient amount of input ingredients to keep repeatedly crafting, the crafter can craft too quickly and run out of an ingredient before the input hopper can replenish it in the crafter, even though you aren't actually out of the ingredient yet. Since we're relying on the crafter slots always being occupied in order to maintain the correct recipe, if a slot empties completely, a different ingredient can fall into it, which breaks the recipe. The problem, in essence, is this. A recipe that takes 9 ingredients will use up 9 ingredients per redstone pulse, and the input hopper only replenishes items once every 4 redstone ticks, as we learned in Lesson 5. This means it takes 36 game ticks to replenish all ingredients after crafting, since we need to replenish 9 items at 4 redstone ticks per item, and 9 times 4 is 36. So if the crafter is receiving redstone pulses more often than once every 36 redstone ticks, it will craft too quickly, and will eventually end up with an empty slot that breaks the recipe. But there's an easy fix for this. Let's consider for a second that since crafting occurs on the rising edge of a redstone pulse, we only need to ensure that there's a delay of 36 redstone ticks between rising edges. So if we add 36 redstone ticks of delay to the comparator loop by adding in some more repeaters, we can ensure we never pulse too quickly. The magic formula is 1 2-tick repeater per crafting ingredient, or 4 full delay repeaters plus a single 2-tick repeater for 9 ingredient recipes. Now, some of you are wondering, hey, wait, that's only 18 redstone ticks, not 36. And you're right. The reason we can get away with this is that while it only takes 18 ticks for the rising edge to reach the crafter from the comparator output, it takes 18 more ticks for the comparator output that was just cut off to propagate through the repeaters again and let the comparator output turn on again. And 18 plus 18 is 36, meaning we've added enough delay for a 9-ingredient recipe. So just remember that the key to this approach is ensuring your comparator clock loop is long enough. Also, this approach can craft almost anything, but won't work for recipes that require non-stackable ingredients, like how dispensers require bows. It also has the drawback that because it maintains its recipe by keeping the crafter slots completely full, you'll need up to 15 stacks of buffer ingredients in the crafter and hopper that are just used to configure the recipe. Although you can use unstackable items like wooden shovels as placeholders in your hopper if you have fewer than 5 ingredient types. Ingredient batching. This approach sends ingredients into the crafter in order, one batch at a time, and crafts only when all slots are filled. This approach can craft pretty much anything, including recipes that require non-stackable ingredients. It's the slowest method, and it takes the most space, but it's also the most versatile. And it's what my Easy Mass Autocrafter tutorial is based on, which is a machine that takes up to 9 shulker boxes of ingredients as input and fills 1 shulker box with the resultant crafted item. To make this one, well, the short version is that it's a queue of hoppers that each lock the hopper behind them when occupied, which forces the inserted ingredients to stay in order and prevents unwanted stacking of the same ingredient in the hoppers. If that explanation didn't immediately cause a light bulb moment for you, I recommend just pulling up my Easy Mass Autocrafter tutorial for this one, because this build is a whole video by itself. Now that you know how to set up a crafter, let's move on to what you can do with it, right after we hear from our sponsor, MistRazor. Wait, am I reading that right? I'm sponsoring myself? Hi, I'm MistRazor. Pretty sure I already covered that. Sure, whatever. You're the MistRazor that teaches Redstone. I'm the MistRazor that makes SMP content, variety content, and most importantly, challenge content. So you're the reason I haven't updated in almost a year? Wait, what's challenge content? I mean, not exactly. It's complicated. Don't worry about it. You're back now. Anyway, challenge content is where I set challenges for myself using custom mods written by me. Meaning they're not something you can find on any other Minecraft channel. Like what? Like Minecraft, but I can only eat TNT. Where my goal is to find and bring a netherite upgrade back to the overworld with as few deaths as possible, while the only thing I can eat is TNT. Or the Love Hurts Challenge series, where Mango Meowie and I try to reach and defeat the Ender Dragon, but we can't stay more than 10 blocks apart from each other without taking deadly heartbreak damage. So what you're saying is you want the viewers to subscribe to the main MistRazor channel as well? What I'm saying is, I'd love for the viewers to give my main channel content a try. And if they enjoy it, then yeah, please do subscribe. And if not, that's why they're 2 separate channels. Is that it? Is that the end of the sponsored segment? Yep, thanks for... Okay, back to the lesson. Let's start with a super common example of what you can do with the crafter. You're in your storage room, gathering materials for a build, and you need an empty shulker box. Maybe you have a storage chest for empty shulkers, and that's great if there are some, but at some point you're going to have to make new ones. Or maybe you'll craft a bunch in advance, but that's kind of annoying because while the shells and chests both stack, the boxes themselves don't. But what if you have a semi-automatic multi-ingredient crafter already set up? You can have 2 hoppers pointing into the crafter, configured to make shulker boxes, one fed by a double chest of shulker shells, and another fed by a single chest of chests. Then, using a button or pressure plate, you supply a redstone pulse and immediately receive a newly crafted shulker box. There is the convenience aspect of not having to manually craft it, yes, but also consider this. A double chest full of pre-crafted shulker boxes can only hold 54 shulker boxes at once. However, if you instead store the ingredients and only craft on demand, your 7-block setup can hold enough ingredients to craft 2,112 shulker boxes. That is, you can fill it up once and then hit the button whenever you need a new shulker box, and you can do that 2,111 more times before you'll need to lift a finger to replenish the ingredients. The crafter is also very useful for farms. If your farm produces an item you'd like to compress for more efficient storage, the crafter can help with that. Bone meal farm? Bone blocks. Iron farm? Iron blocks. Gold farm? Gold ingots for bartering or gold blocks to stockpile. Raid farm? Emerald blocks. But it's not limited to just compressing items into blocks. You can also make an automatic fireworks factory like I did in my hardcore world, for no fuss unlimited elytra flight, or keep turtle scoots ready to craft into turtle shells as needed for a potion machine, since turtle scoots stack but turtle shells don't. Perhaps one of the most underutilized uses for the crafter by the average player, not by Redstoners, Redstoners love this, is combining the crafter with bamboo farms for auto-crafting bamboo into bamboo blocks and then into bamboo planks to mass craft basically anything that can be made with wood. Chests, barrels, boats, signs, tools, you name it. And the best part is that you can just use whichever of the 4 automatic crafting methods that makes the most sense for the bamboo-derived item you want to craft. If you want to make sticks, single ingredient pulse spam will work just fine. To make bamboo planks, you can use single ingredient crafter measurement to make bamboo blocks, and single ingredient pulse spam to turn those blocks into planks. You can set up an assembly line style series of crafters like this, where each crafter outputs to a hopper line that leads to the next crafter, and each crafter is set up with the activation method that makes the most sense for its recipe. So here we have single ingredient crafter measurement turning bamboo into bamboo blocks, followed by single ingredient pulse spam to make bamboo planks, followed by single ingredient crafter measurement to make chests, and that final crafter outputs to a double chest to hold the results. As an aside, this setup is going to be super slow because the bamboo farm attached to it is tiny. So if you're going to make one of these for real, I'd advise making a bigger bamboo farm. The good news is that you can just take this one and make it a lot longer to harvest more bamboo. You can basically just copy-paste a vertical slice of this bamboo farm and it will still work the same, which is what Redstoners mean when they say something is tileable. In this case, it's one wide tileable, because each slice is only one block wide. The best way to make big bamboo farms is with flying machines, so I suppose I'll have to cover those soon. But we're getting off track. Back to the crafter. If we temporarily move the hoppers, you can see that these are just 3 crafters set up in a boilerplate standard style, the only difference from prior examples being that the comparators are reading from the crafters through a solid block, which we covered in Lesson 6. There's an easy way to make this a bit more compact, but the crafter is already a big enough subject by itself that I don't want to introduce any other new blocks during this lesson, so we'll save that for later. The crafter is also great for minigames, which brings us to this lesson's cool thing you can build. Let's say you're building a PvP minigame, where all players start with iron armor. You could do that by manually crafting the armor and retrieving any dropped armor between rounds. Or, you could let dropped armor despawn naturally, and instead have crafters feeding into dispensers that auto-equip each player and are fed by an on-site iron farm, meaning the game maintains itself. There is 0 manual upkeep required. We're not going to design a whole minigame, but I am going to show you the armor crafting and dispensing system I just described, so you can use it in yours. As usual, it's made up entirely of redstone modules you've seen in this and previous lessons, with the exception of the iron farm, which is just ENX04's Day 1 iron farm. I'll cover iron golem spawning rules in a minute, but for now, let's just go over the redstone modules and how they link together. To start with, you should know that all the clear glass in this build is just there to make things easier to see. Feel free to replace it with solid blocks in an actual build. The red glass is there to prevent iron golems from spawning where they shouldn't. On to the flow of items, the first thing you'll notice is that the iron farm outputs to a bubble column to shoot the items up. You can make this column as tall as you want, so you can just find a conveniently sized cave and build the iron farm portion there, using the bubble column to bring the iron and poppies up to your armor crafting system. The next thing to notice is we added a bend in the water stream, instead of having it perfectly lined up with the bubble column. The reason for that is so the items hug the far wall instead of going down the middle, where they could potentially get stuck in the cup part of a hopper. As long as they're over the side lip of the hoppers, they'll be able to keep moving. Next, there's an item filter from Lesson 6 to pull all the poppies out of the water stream and redirect them to this dropper. We have the item counter from Lesson 7 attached to the dropper in order to drop all the captured poppies into the lava underneath. Feel free to save them in a chest or compost them for bone meal if you'd rather do that. Now that we've dealt with the poppies, the only thing remaining in the item stream is iron ingots, which is perfect because that's the only ingredient we need to craft iron armor. Next are the hoppers that point into the crafters. Since the item stream will only contain iron ingots now that we've dealt with the poppies, we don't need to have any sort of item filter. We can just have a plain hopper pointing into each of the crafters. We have one crafter for each armor type: boots, leggings, chestplate, and helmet. I used spruce trapdoors here so we can easily look into the crafter inventories, but they don't actually need to be trapdoors. Any full block will do. The crafters are set to output into upward-facing dispensers, and each upward-facing dispenser has a pressure plate on top, which will strongly power the dispenser when a player steps on it, activating both the dispenser, which equips the armor onto the player, and the crafter, which crafts another piece of armor to replace the one that was just equipped. Finally, we have fire at the end of the water stream. I used soul sand for soul fire, but netherrack and normal fire would work too. This burns up any overflow iron ingots to prevent them from just sitting there until they despawn, which would unnecessarily add to server lag. And that's it for the redstone. It's just 5 simple modules: the poppy filter and item counter to dispose of the poppies, and the 4 armor crafter plus dispenser modules. Everything else is just piping the items where they need to go with water streams, and containing the iron golem spawns to the spawn platform. On that note, let's talk about iron golem spawning rules really quick before we review. Without getting too deep into the details, since iron farms are an entire topic unto themselves, iron golems need a 3-high vertical space to spawn, and they spawn within a predetermined box centered on a frightened villager. That box is 17 blocks long, 17 blocks wide, and 13 blocks tall. In short, it extends 6 blocks below a villager's feet and 4 blocks above their head, with 8 blocks extending in all horizontal directions. This green glass box is a representation of the spawn area for this cluster of villagers. If we measure it with Axiom, we can see that it's actually 19 by 18 and 13 blocks tall. The reason it's 19 by 18 instead of 17 by 17 is that the villagers have a 3 by 2 area they can walk around in. So we need to add 8 blocks in each horizontal direction, not from a single block, but from the 3 by 2 area, since they could be anywhere inside it when they summon a golem. And if we add 3 plus 8 plus 8, we get 19, while 2 plus 8 plus 8 is 18. Since their y-coordinate doesn't change, we were able to leave the height at 13 as you'd expect. If we superimpose the spawning blocks over the actual iron farm, we'll see that the only spawnable blocks within it are indeed the spawn platform for the iron golems. So when you're building this, it's very important to ensure that there are no spawnable blocks within that box. That could mean mining it out completely, covering all surfaces with non-spawnable blocks, or simply filling it in so there are no 3 high vertical gaps a golem could spawn in. If you're experimenting with this in creative, you should know that villagers need to have slept recently in order to spawn iron golems, so you'll want to enable the advanced time game rule, or just make it night all the time so the villagers can sleep as needed. And if iron golems won't spawn, but they were spawning, then either there's a hidden iron golem somewhere nearby that's preventing further spawns and you need to kill it, or you might need to break and replace the villagers' beds. Doing that usually fixes iron farms that have broken for no obvious reason. And that's how it works. Before we end, let's go over what we talked about today. 1. Comparators reading from crafters look at how many slots are occupied, rather than counting items, and they only output redstone power levels from 0 to 9. 2. There are 4 main ways to autocraft. Single ingredient pulse spam, where you use a redstone clock to endlessly pulse the crafter. Single ingredient crafter measurement, where you power the crafter whenever all slots are full. Multi-ingredient input measurement, where you power the crafter whenever the input hopper is full. And ingredient batching, where you insert the ingredients one by one in the correct order to make your recipe, then power the crafter when all slots are full. 3. You can chain crafters with hoppers to create an assembly line that can create items that need multiple steps to craft. Finally, I want to apologize for the delay in getting this lesson out. I didn't expect it to take nearly a year to get to it, but IRL stuff was impacting my ability to make Redstone videos. As far as I can tell, I should be able to return to my cadence of making these lessons approximately monthly, and that's what I plan to do. With that, thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time. Bye!